Hello and welcome back to another episode, a special episode of Embracing Magic on the Road, where we'll be looking at the seen and unseen parts of death. And we'll be doing that through the written word and in person.
We'll be heading over to the Haunted Bookshop in Bristol, where we'll be looking at some books that connect us with death and also help us to commune with spirits. And also I'll be having a special tarot reading.
And we'll be ending our episode in Arnisvale Cemetery, a beautiful woodland cemetery, where we'll be connecting with the physical parts of death.
When thinking about connecting with spirits, you may think of visiting a graveyard, holding a seance, or using some form of divination like tarot, but you may not have thought about connecting through books. The first part of this episode, we are at the Haunted Bookshop here in Bristol, where we'll be looking at some books and tools that will help you to connect with spirit. We'll be talking about some ghost stories of some things that have happened within the shop. And then I'll be heading down into the basement where I'll meet Francesca, who is a tarot reader here. And I'll be receiving a reading where I'm hoping some ancestral spirits will come through for me.
So you might be wondering why we're in a bookshop today. As much as this is a beautiful bookshop, it isn't specifically about this one. It's about bookshops in general for witches. The reason why we connect with these spaces is they are realms, portals to other lands, to stories that take us out of our own lives and connect us with ancient spirits, with folklore, with amazing stories outside of our own lives. And that's how we find more meaning. That's how we learn more about our interests. And we're excited to walk around the bookshop and to highlight some specific books for you today. So I'm going to walk over to Steph now, and we're going to have a look at some books that we might find interesting if we wanted to connect with ancient spirits, our ancestral line, perhaps even folklore, stories that have been passed down through the generations. And I can see Steph now has got a beautiful book in her hands. What are you looking at?
Just a folklore of the sea, myths and legends of the maritime world. Thought that was an interesting one for connecting to stories of the past.
Yeah, I think folklore is really interesting. You brought it up quite a few times in our episodes. Why is it that you think folklore is important?
I think it's about keeping the stories of our ancestors alive. Otherwise, if those stories died out, then we wouldn't be remembering those spirits of the past, would we?
Yeah, it's quite literally connection, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's great to see books on folklore on the shelves. I mean, I've got a few vintage ones at home as well, as you know. But yeah, folklore I think is an important one.
I think a lot of people consider folklore a bit like religion as well, don't you think?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the time, like even with like folk witchcraft, it's about practices that people have passed down because they work, right? If it's medicinal, medicinal plants or cooking techniques or even ceremonial work, people share this folk witchcraft because it's something that has worked for their family, their grandmother, her grandmother,
that information is just so important, isn't it, to be passed down. So yeah,
and highlights a good reason for keeping a grimoire as well and recording your own ceremonies and your own practices. How about like a deity? Is there any deity books here?
Hecate over here, goddess of the underworld. You've read this book, haven't you?
Yeah, it's brilliant. Most witches love Hecate because she's literally the goddess of the moon, the goddess of the underworld. She's a really controversial character, but one that witches tend to connect with. I think that if you've watched the recent Sabrina the Teenage Witch, she plays a pretty important role, doesn't she?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're into deities and you're interested in spirit practice, this is probably a really good book for you. I think it's excellent, and I would definitely say it's worth a read. I thought it was pretty profound in places.
Interesting. I'll have to give that one a go. The other one I saw was Piercing the Veil, which I think is a book that you would love to read.
You're trying to spend my money.
Always. Which is Performing Tarot Divination While in the Lunar and Astral Realm.
Oh, I'd like, take my money. There you go.
So yeah, a really interesting one. All to do with lucid dreaming and basically doing divination in your dreams.
It sounds fascinating. It doesn't really sound like the average kind of tarot book.
No.
And then that was one that
Ancestral
definitely...
Cult. Yeah, that was one that you kind of...
I haven't read this book, so I can't pretend that I know what's going on in it, but this absolutely speaks to me in an aesthetic way. Being someone that's sort of into black metal and into Norway and everything like that. And obviously being like an ancestral death witch. This is a bit of me, this one. And it says, this religion encompasses both the cult of life and the cult of death. An intricate system is aimed at the preservation, the continuation and well-being of life through the interaction and cooperation between the living and the deceased members of a kin. The reason why ancestral work is so important is because if you're interested in anything to do with your lineage, you know, books are a beautiful way to do it because these books can give you the guidance that you need in order to communicate with spirits, right? So we you know, spoken about tarot before. What are other divination practices like pendulums?
Pendulum magic.
Nice.
Got a book right here.
You know, scrying, one of my majors.
One of your favourites, yeah.
One of my favourite practices.
Throwing bones.
These books provide practical instructions on how to access the other realm, the unseen. And that is just part of this episode today, isn't it? To talk about the part of the unseen that you can access through the written word, through ink.
Yeah.
And next, we'll move to a more physical way that you can do it.
Yeah, so we've got a variety of tarot and oracle decks here, which are really good for spirit communion. Oracle is probably a good access point, don't you think, for beginners?
It's a bit easier to read. Yeah,
a bit lighter. And obviously tarot is a little bit more complex, I would say.
Next up, we also have some runes here. This is a practice that I really like, and I think these ones are made out of sunstone. And I actually have a set at home that are made out of quartz. I think it's really lovely working with elemental runes, you know. So if you can go out onto the beach, you know, or go into the woods, you can find your own stones, you can make your own rune set, and then you just cast them onto the floor and you read the symbols. So that's another option for you in terms of divination.
And then we've got some really amazing herbs to connect with spirit here. We've got mugwort, which is one of my favourites. It's really good for lucid dreaming, astral projection, moon work,
hedge riding.
Yeah, and spirit communication, obviously. So yeah, mugwort's a great one, and then you can obviously use it as an incense. Probably would be the best way to use it, or even tea. Yeah, but
tea is really good for dreaming, actually.
Yeah, it's not so good for people that are pregnant or breastfeeding though, so just want to remember that. And then we've got...
Yeah, we were talking about these because we were talking about spirit bottles. So you can actually get these empty vessels and you can turn them into essentially like a memorial of a loved one that's passed away by putting a letter in there and writing to their ancestor, telling them updates about your life, or, you know, something that you feel like you weren't able to say in life. And you can also add to the bottle things that they liked, you know, like maybe a bit of their clothing, or sometimes people have a bit of hair that's still left on a hairbrush, and you can add these things to the bottle and keep it as like almost like a gravestone, you know, in memory of them. We've got herb bundles as well. You know, these are always really handy, I think, especially if you're going into doing spirit communication. It's really handy to cleanse yourself first before you do the work, and then cleanse yourself afterwards. You know, I'm not someone to cleanse spaces, but I definitely think in terms of removing negative energy or any kind of like energy from the day before you start doing the work is really important. It's just good spiritual hygiene.
And then cleansing after communication.
Always cleansing afterwards and closing off that communication so that you can sleep peacefully.
So they are just a few tools that you can use for spirit communion and ancestral work. Obviously, there's way more tools that you can use. But we are gonna go downstairs into the basement now and talk about some real spirits that have been a part of this shop.
So we've just entered the basement of the Haunted Bookshop in Bristol. And sort of, I guess, the first observations is obviously it's been decorated really beautifully. It's giving a sort of fortune teller vibe with the dark colours and the beaded curtain and the velvet and the beautiful lighting. But on an energetic level, what I can certainly feel is how much colder it is down here.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a slightly eerie feel as well.
I'm getting like a really strange feeling in my chest.
Oh,
being down here, yeah.
I can also really smell like fresh tobacco. It's reminding me of my granddad actually, because he used to smoke rollies, and he'd always have the pouch of tobacco. That's really what I can smell down here. But we have a really interesting story to share with you about the bookshop, about a spirit that has resided in here for a long time. And I'm going to pass over to Steph now, who had a great talk with the owner, Monica.
Yeah, so basically this armchair here was brought into the shop by Monica, and it seems as though a presence is attached to it, which I don't know whether they named it Stephen.
I think they did. They affectionately named it Stephen. Since this armchair has been within the shop, there's been some strange paranormal activity happening within the shop, such as overnight the books would go all the way to the end of the bookshelf, and then they'd come in and obviously all the books would be moved and disturbed. And also Monica, the owner of the shop, was experiencing sleep paralysis. That's something that I know a lot about, so yeah, not fun.
So her friend said that perhaps Stephen had followed her home, and I think she was actually experiencing some like scary things within her sleep, like feeling like she was pinned down and stuff like that.
That is scary.
Whether it was Stephen or not, she doesn't know. But yeah, we also, when filming the chair for B-roll, the camera wouldn't focus on it.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that I've definitely noticed about spirit activity, that if you've got a camera in your hand and they do not want to be pictured, they will mess up your camera. That's something that I've definitely experienced myself. And it's not surprising to imagine that a spirit might have followed Monica home, because, if you imagine all of the divination practice that goes on in here, the tarot readings, I'd imagine those practitioners are cleansing themselves afterwards, because that's just good spiritual hygiene.
Yeah.
So if they're cleansing Stephen, out of the space, then he's bound to attach himself to someone and try and find another home.
Yeah, so we don't know whether Stephen is still here or he went home with Monica. So I just had my reading with Francesca, which was absolutely incredible. Anyone at home who hasn't had a reading before, all readers read differently. But Francesca started off the reading by reading my general energy and seeing if anything came through. And then we went into the actual card reading. She used a vintage deck that she'd got. Well, she actually had a few different decks on the table and asked which one I'd like to use, and I picked the vintage deck. And yeah, it was just an absolutely incredible experience. So we decided not to film the reading today, because obviously readings are quite personal, but I will share a few things that came through. An ancestral spirit came through, potentially, a lady with dark hair and a turquoise stone. So that was really exciting. And it came through that I come from a very ancient lineage, which was really incredible to hear. And I'd love to dive more into that with Francesca at another point in another reading. And also, it was just quite a fiery and exciting reading. So I feel very buzzed and energized by the whole experience. And generally, Francesca just holds a really safe and loving space, and I felt really respected throughout the whole reading. So yeah, if you're in Bristol and you want to have a reading with Francesca, I would highly recommend coming to the Haunted Bookshop. So as you can see, receiving a tarot reading is a great way not only to connect with your past, present and future, but also to connect with any ancestral spirits that might come through for you.
We've turned the final page on the bookshop, and now we're moving into something much more permanent, more ancient, deeper. This is Ancestral Cemetery, the great archive of the dead. Here, stories aren't bound in leather on paper. They are etched into stone with moss and choked by ivy. These are the names that will not be forgotten. These are the names that we need to speak aloud. In Ancestral Cemetery, we'll be walking around, we'll be looking at the gravestones, we'll be reading the names of those that have passed over. Perhaps they haven't been said in a long time, perhaps they're long forgotten, and we will be honouring them in our own way. We'll be looking at the symbols that are on the gravestones and what they mean, and generally just taking in the beautiful environment while we're here. Here lies the bones of Mary Carpenter, a woman who saw society's unwanted, the poor, the criminal, the forgotten, and gave them education and dignity and a second chance. Her grave is simple, but her legacy, that echoes louder than any fancy tomb. So while we're looking at symbols, this is probably one of the most obvious ones that you might see in a graveyard. This is obviously a cross, which will relate to Christianity, but it's a Celtic cross. And the Celtic cross, especially if the person is Irish, has roots in paganism.
So here you'll see that there is a dove symbol on the top of the gravestone. A dove represents Holy Spirit, peace, purity, or the soul ascending to heaven.
A wreath on a gravestone is a beautiful and ancient symbol, rich in layered meanings. And in particular, this one is a laurel wreath, which symbolises honour, wisdom, and sometimes scholarly achievement. Sometimes the wreath is draped or broken, which may indicate mourning or a life that was cut too short.
On a lot of gravestones, you'll see the letters IHS, which is a monogram of Jesus, first three letters in Greek. It is very common on Catholic gravestones.
A funeral urn with a draped sheath is a powerful and classical symbol seen on many 18th and 19th century gravestones, especially in Victorian cemeteries. Typically, they can mean the soul or spirit. The urn has long been a symbol of the soul separated from the body, a vessel for the essence of a person. They can also mean death and mourning. As a cremation wasn't widely practiced in Christian Britain until the late 19th century, the urn is usually symbolic, but not literal.
A favourite amongst the graveyard is obviously an angel. An angel represents a guide to the afterlife. I think it is absolutely beautiful.
I'm standing before the grave of Raja Ram. He was a revolutionary thinker from Bengal. He travelled thousands of miles from his home, and now he rests beneath the domed gravestone, a traditional Indian funeral monument far from where he came. Some call him a ghost of two worlds. Eastern wisdom meets Western reform. It's said that on certain nights, incense drifts from the stone, though none has been lit. A hand holding lilies on a gravestone is a deeply symbolic image, often rich with spiritual and emotional meaning. So, I think lilies, as we know it to be, is one of the most common funeral flowers. It represents innocence and purity and resurrection.
Often when you come to graveyards like this, you'll notice an abundance of gravestones that have been neglected over time. And Toni and I, as part of our ceremony today, have decided to give flowers to the graves and read their names out loud so their memories are not forgotten. Elizabeth.
Martha.
Mary Carpenter.
This one's for you, Ernest Hawkins.
Joseph Albert Hooper and his wife Florence. George Henry Gardner and Gertrude Gardner. So this is part of the ceremony where we're going to be honouring the dead that are buried here within this graveyard, particularly those that have been forgotten. And we're going to be doing some silent prayer together.
We honour those that came before us, those that were laid to rest here, those whose lineage have forgotten to tend to their graves, the names that have been lost, the lives that have been forgotten. We honour you in all of your beautiful humanness, in every way that you showed up in the world, the way you left your imprint on those around you, the art you left, the kindness you brought. We honour you. So the next time that you're walking through a cemetery, take the time to say the names. Look at them, feel them, say them out loud. You might be the first one that said their name in 100 years. And that in itself is a spell of resurrection. So thank you for joining us on this latest episode of the Embracing Magic podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you next time.